Hey leader, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Baratong Advisors. We're also recording live from the new Return.com studio. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel, so make sure you're subscribed there as well. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's made an impact on your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, leader, today you are in for a treat, no pun intended. You're going to hear my conversation with Marc Serrao, who is the owner of the Oakmont Bakery in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you're unfamiliar with Marc, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Marc and his wife Susan started the Oakmont Bakery in 1988, establishing themselves as the town's only full-service retail bakery. They began with 1,200 square feet, 2 children, and a big dream. Since then, their space has dramatically expanded to over 12,500 square feet, making Oakmont Bakery one of the largest retail bakeries in America. Their family has more than doubled, adding 3 more children, and their dream of owning a successful business that will serve Pittsburgh and its surrounding communities for generations to come has been realized. The bakery was established on firm Christian beliefs and an absolute dedication to excellence and integrity in all areas. In 2010, Oakmont Bakery was honored to receive the Retail Bakery of the Year by Modern Baking Magazine, which is the most prestigious award in the retail baking industry, given to only one bakery in the country each year. Marc and Susan attribute their success first to their strong faith in God, and then to their superior product, hardworking staff, and loyal customers, for all of whom they are deeply grateful. Marc and Susan are so blessed to work side by side with many family members to provide a positive working environment where lasting relationships are formed. They consider it an honor to serve Pittsburgh with the outstanding products that their talent, hard work, and dedication have created. And finally, it is their pleasure to create delicious memories for you. And I've gotten to know Marc a little bit, and he's a phenomenal leader. And in our conversation, you're going to hear Marc share the lessons that he learned along the journey of creating one of the world's greatest bakeries. We talk a lot about the role of generosity and faith in his life, and at the end, he actually gives advice to church leaders, and I just think you're going to love this interview. But before we dive in, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Baratong Advisors. The financial advisors at Baratong Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Baratong Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baratongadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Baratong Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny, and my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers and had an incredible experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And I also want to thank our new sponsor, Return.com. And leader, let me just ask you this. Have you ever had an interest in investing in real estate? Well, now for as little as $500, you can become a commercial real estate investor. Just visit Return.com to learn more. That's REITURN.com. Investing involves risk. Please consult the Return Offering Circular if you're interested in investing. And with all that being said, here's my conversation with Marc Serrao. Marc, welcome to the L3 Leadership Podcast. I've been looking forward to doing this for a long time. I've had the chance to interview you a few times for an organization that we're both a part of called the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation with our friend Lee Kreitcher. And you've added so much value to the young leaders that we've influenced there that I thought I have to have you on the podcast. I think you'll add massive value to our audience. So thank you so much for your time and for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. So you're the owner of Oakmont Bakery, and
Yes.
I just want to give people perspective of what Oakmont Bakery is now. People from all over the world visit your bakery because it's famous, but for those who may not have context, can you just give us an idea of the scale and what Oakmont looks like today?
Yeah, so we started out in a very small shop, about 1,000 square feet, and we moved into the lower boulevard of Oakmont, which is still the business district. And we're about 3,000 square feet there. And now we're in our newest location, which is right off of the Halton Bridge which is the corridor into Oakmont. And we're in an 18,000 square foot building with 2 warehouses with an additional 5,000 square feet.
Wow. And how many employees do you have currently?
We have around 220.
That's incredible. And I don't know if you know any fun stats off the top of your head, but I think you mentioned like how many thousands of Christmas cookies you bake every day. Like, do you have any fun stats like that for the?
Yeah, I actually for the interview, I got some reports this morning. So this past December 2022, we sold 11,044 cookie trays in 10 days. We sold 49,720 dozen cookies. Besides the cookie trays. Punchki season, which is January 6th to Easter Saturday, we sold 278,000 punchkis. And like these numbers, I mean, they are gigantic, but to me, they're unbelievably gigantic because it takes so much to make all this stuff. Like it takes a lot of people and a lot of hard work. So they're really big. But some of the numbers that I think are really impressive that, when I was, my early days at the bakery, I wouldn't even believe this. Because like we used to wait on 25 to 40 people an hour. And that's how we decide how to schedule and what to make, things like that. Easter Saturday, we waited on 4,190 people. An average hour, we waited on 400 people an hour. And our highest hour was 488 people. So that, moving 488 people in 1 hour in Oakmont is really impressive to me.
I think that would be impressive to anyone listening. That's incredible. And we're listening to these stats and, you mentioned you certainly didn't start here. And I think it's easy for a lot of leaders to see what you're doing with Oakmont Bakery and see the success of it and see the scale of it now. But take us back to the beginning. How did you actually get into the business? How did you start the bakery? What did it look like then?
So I started, when I was 13 or 14 years old, I started as a housekeeping member in a donut shop in Penn Hills called the Donut Shack. So we called them the cleaning boys then, and I washed pans and mopped the floors. And when I was about 15, he made me the supervisor of that department, which I thought was so exciting. So I had 2 people under me. And then I married my high school sweetheart. We got married, and I was working for Giant Eagle and Foodland, 2 supermarket chains. One as a merchandiser, the other one as a manager. And I did that for a few years, and we started having children. And then while I was working at one of the grocery stores, a produce manager came in and told me about Oakmont Bakery, that, somebody opened this little bakery in Oakmont, and he had it open for 7 days or 9 days, something like that. And he was 40 years old. He had a heart attack and died, and it was for sale. So I went and looked at it, and he did a really, really nice job. He wasn't a baker. He actually owned Hallmark shops. But he did a really good job. He had bought all new equipment, which at my age then, I was 25, I wouldn't have been able to afford to buy new equipment. I would have bought used equipment. It wouldn't have probably been in Oakmont. It would have been in a town with cheaper rent. So his family, I met his brother who was in charge of his estate, and he made it possible. They held the mortgage, and he sold me the business for $75,000, which to me was like $5 million now. But they made it possible. God made it possible. So I ended up buying the bakery. It was funny because I was married, and I went home and I said to my wife, my wife isn't as much of a risk taker as I am. And I went home and I said, hey, I have something to tell you. And she said, I have something to tell you. And I said, well, you go first. No, you go first. So I said, okay, I found this bakery in Oakmont, which was 15 minutes from our house, that I want to buy, And she started crying, and she said, I'm pregnant, and we have health insurance, and we have to keep our health insurance, And so we worked it all out, obviously. We had our that was my son, who now is in succession for the bakery. So we had him, and we bought the bakery. And but I still, to this day, like every once in a while, when something really good happens, or when we look at stats like this, and my wife was very impressed with it too, and I'll say to her, yeah, we still have health insurance.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thanks for your wife for jumping in with you.
Absolutely.
Just quick question. When the guy from Giant Eagle, I think you said it was Giant Eagle, told you about the bakery, is that something, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I think some people ask, or some people just born entrepreneurs, is owning your own business and bakery something you always wanted to do? Or was that the first time, the light bulb went off of, I can do this at my own thing?
No, I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. Like I've always, since I was a little boy, I would get up 5 o'clock in the morning and go outside and build a lemonade stand and sell lemonade. I was always doing stuff like that. I was always finding a way to build things, to make things, like business things like that. And so when I was growing up, there was a series on called with Alex Keaton. I forget the name of it. But anyways, Alex Keaton was young, and he was kind of like that. He was a young guy. He had this entrepreneurial spirit, and his name was Alex Keaton. So my dad always called me Alex. So I always had that.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, because we live in a world now where, everyone, probably when you started, entrepreneurship wasn't the cool thing. Now I feel like everyone who's breathing wants to be an entrepreneur and start their own business. Do you think that it's something that you just either have or you don't have, or do you truly believe that, anyone could go out and start their own thing and make it?
I just think it depends on what it is, what kind of business it is and what your goals are. To me, I think I was born with that kind of a gift or talent for it, for building a business. And I think you have to be a visionary for sure to be able to see, like I always said, when I first started the bakery, and it was so small, I always said that I was going to have the biggest bakery in Pittsburgh, and that was just one of my goals. And so I think you have to be able to look ahead and say, I'm going to work really hard to get to that, but that's what I'm going for. So whatever it is, it's always something different.
Yeah, you talked about, you've always been a risk taker. I'm also curious here, are those calculated risks, or is it, going along with that visionary, hey, I'm going to risk whatever it takes to be the biggest bakery? How do you assess risk?
So I think for me, like I'm a big risk taker. So, I'm not a gambler. So I don't like going to casinos and gambling because I feel like that's a different type of risk. I like taking risks where I know what I'm capable of and I can, climb to that. And like I remember at one point, when I first started the bakery, it wasn't going that well. I was working like 16 or 18 hours a day. The bakery started off doing pretty well right from the beginning, but it was so hard. And, there were times when I had to decide, am I going to pay for flour this week or sugar? Instead of when it was due, it was what could I afford to pay for? And that was kind of a scary time. But my goal then was I will do whatever it takes to make this business succeed. And I always said that to myself. I get up in the morning, I was tired, or I'd deal with, a problem with the customer or an employee, but I always said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this business succeed. That was my thing.
Wow. Well, let's go back to actually, you started the bakery, or you bought the bakery, and actually growing it. It seems like early on you made some really unique decisions in the industry specifically. I know that you made the decision to focus 100% on retail, to have fully stocked shelves. Can you talk about those decisions early on and how big of a difference they made? And even just going back to risk, what was the risk factor like with those decisions?
Yeah. So when I first, I was raised in the bakery business really. So I had some really great mentors, from pretty much a young boy through, my 20s. And the one thing that everyone kind of agreed with, business owners, the supermarket managers, was the way to make money in a bakery is to sell out a product by the end of the day. So that was my goal. So I would be really happy if at the end of the day, now I didn't like empty shelves ever. So at the end of the day, when our shelves were empty, it didn't feel right to me, but I believed it was the right thing to do, a logical thing to do. So that's what I did. And I noticed when we were open until 7 o'clock and there was nobody coming in the store after 6. So we started closing at 6. And then there was nobody coming in after, it's 6. So I decided to close at 5. And, I prayed about it, talked to my wife about it. I said, this isn't right, because if we keep going like this, we're not going to be open at all. So I decided that, and this is very unconventional for bakeries, I decided that we always, my wife and I are givers. So I loved at the end of the day giving leftovers to area food banks, veterans, senior citizens, shelter, all kinds of shelters. So I didn't mind having a few large boxes of stuff left to give away. We had a couple of organizations that would come in and get stuff, but I decided that we were going to bake all the way through the day, like till the middle of the morning or middle of the afternoon, which was unusual for a bakery. Usually you bake all night and then you're done. You saw everything you have. So we decided to keep baking, and that we were going to have stuff on our shelves until the end of the day. And whatever was left, we would donate a lot more stuff to these organizations, and hopefully it wouldn't. Hopefully we would still make enough money to keep the business going. So immediately, we started doing that baking stuff, and our lines were lasting throughout the day until like now. We actually will close the bakery at 7:00, and we'll lock sometimes 80 or 100 people inside the bakery because they know that they're coming in, they're going to find full shelves. And so our business is we actually serve more people our last hour than we serve our first hour. And so that worked really well. And actually that year, I used to read a bakery magazine called Modern Baking. I read every month. I waited for it to come, and it would have stories about bakeries. There was no internet then. It would have stories about bakeries, big bakeries, and how they ran their businesses and stuff. And every year in the summer, there was a kind of like a competition for best bakery in the country, in America. And I would read them. I mean, I used to read, and I used to think that's going to be me someday, even though it seemed impossible, So, but the first part of that is you had to write an essay about some special skill or some new thing you brought to the to that business. And so I used that, and I called it our merchandising department, which because we started getting so busy, we would hire people that weren't cashiers, that weren't housekeeping or bakers, but they were merchandisers. And all they did all day was fill our trays up, rotate our product, clean our trays, keep our cases looking pristine. So we won that award that year for merchandising. And so it was like there were 10 different topics, and we won the merchandising that year.
Wow. That's incredible. I know in your business, you've also had obstacles throughout the way. And I actually didn't know this, in the times that we spent together, but I heard you on another interview with Carrie Newhoff, which was a great interview. You mentioned that very early on, I forget how old you were, but you actually got sued. And I think you were 20 something. Can you tell us that story? Because I listened to it and I'm like, if that happened to me, I don't know what I'd do. So yeah, can you share that story and what you learned from it?
So I learned a lot through that. So when I bought the bakery from the family of the guy that passed away, he signed a 5-year lease, and the landlord was kind of holding the estate to that lease, and he had to okay another person to come in and take over the lease. And so I went and I was interviewed by him, and they accepted me as taking over this lease. And there was a part of the lease that said, now at that time, that was 35 years ago, the average rent in Oakmont was, I think, like $5 a square foot, which my rent should have been about $500 a month. But his rent was $1,000 a month, which was a lot for the small space I was in. But I saw the potential. It was all put together already and all that. So I did that. And I didn't have an attorney then, but I noticed in the lease this one little section that said you can choose, the tenant can choose a high rent, which he did, $1,000 a month, $10 a square foot, or can choose a low rent and give 10% of the gross revenue of the business to the landlord, which meant that he'd come in and audit the books and all that. So when I saw that, knowing what I know now, of course, I would have taken this to an attorney and they would have taken it completely out. But we just scratched it out and initialed it. So 5 years later, when my lease was up, I was going to stay in this location because and even though it was probably way too small for us by now, but my mind I couldn't wrap my mind around moving in Oakmont, having a bigger place and all that. So we were good with that, and went and talked to the landlord, and he said, I said I wanted to remodel it a little bit, and he was going to raise the rent 50%, and I was like, 50%? That's insane for that size. And pretty much what he said is, here's the deal. If you move, you pay the rent and you stay there for 5 more years, or if you move, I'm going to sue you for the section of the lease which asks for the 10% that you never paid. And I said, well, first of all, I never paid it because it wasn't part of our agreement. And that's obvious that you never audited the business. Like the first year they would have audited the business and all that. But anyways, in the end, I said, I'm moving. So I found a new location. I hired an attorney. And it was a few years. And my wife and I were very nervous. Really, we were afraid because he was suing us for a lot of money. And so in the end, it kind of worked out in our favor that instead of having, we were supposed to have a trial, and when my attorney went down for the trial, they normally have this part of it where they say there's always a possibility that your hearing would be called that day, and you have to be ready for it. Well, we weren't ready for it, and they called very unusually. They called my trial that day. So on the way to downtown Pittsburgh to the courthouse that day, I called our pastor and I was telling him, I said, I'm so nervous. I'm on my way down to this. We're not prepared. My lawyer's not prepared. And he said, just remember, you're going to be judged by a judge, just like you're going to be judged. But there's going to be a lot of things you're judged for in your lifetime. And when you're sitting in front of this judge, tell him the absolute truth. Don't blow anything up. Don't diminish anything. Just tell the truth about what happened. And I did. I said, I looked at him a whole different way. He said to me, kind of look at the judge like he has a fishing hat on. You're just having a talk with, a regular guy. So I did that, and it went so well. The judge at the very end of the thing, he said to the landlord, normally I tell you guys that I'm going to go back in my chambers, and then I come out and say, I'm going to give you my verdict in 2 weeks or whatever. And he said, but I don't have to do that. You should be mentoring this young businessman. Instead, you're trying to hurt him. And he said, I rule in favor of the defendant. And this is over today, which was such an unbelievable blessing.
Wow. That brings to mind, I'm just curious, as the leader, as the owner of your company, for how many years have you owned Oakmont?
35
years. Where we're living in a world right now post-COVID where leaders are having tons of mental health issues. It's stressful. And I'm always curious when I talk to leaders who have a lot of pressure on them or a lot of weight, how they actually deal with that. I think about you have a 24/7 operation, 200 plus employees that you were mentioning, all these cookies you have to deliver. Then you have all these other things going on. How have you learned when things like getting sued come up that make you nervous or you feel pressure, and maybe you don't, but how do you deal with like the pain and stress of being an owner and a leader and not, break down mentally, et cetera?
Well, because I have children in the business, it's even more important to me now to teach them how to get through this stuff. So me going through that few years, my wife and I, besides we were both tormented, we just didn't know what the outcome was going to be. But we also, our relationship with God got much stronger, and our relationship together, we were partners, and we were like we prayed about this every single day, and it kind of overshadowed us. So what I do now is I always, I tell my kids, and I try to do this myself, is just try to, keep everything in perspective. Keep it in a compartment in your mind where you can turn it off. Like I can, I go home at night, and I still work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, pretty much. But when I go to sleep, I'm instantly sleeping. I don't let my mind, race. And I think the most important thing is to put your priorities in order and know that, like, my business is really important. It's a blessing to me, my family, and a lot of other people. But it's not the most important thing in the world. The most important thing in the world is my relationship with God and making sure that my kids see that we live a life of faith, and that we're helping other people. So I kind of try to put my focus on that stuff. One thing that my wife and I found in those days is that when we would focus on scriptures, it would take our mind off of that nightmare,
Wow. That's so good and so wise. And you mentioned your wife several times already. I am curious, you talked about her saying okay to the bakery. You talked about walking through this. I mean, it sounds like she's been along for the whole journey. Any advice out there for people who work with family members, maybe even especially a spouse? What have you learned about working with your spouse and keeping your marriage and even having a thriving marriage?
So in the early days, because we couldn't afford a lot of employees, we both worked. I would go at 1:00 in the morning, start baking, and my wife would come in. We had two kids then, so she would come in later, like in the morning, like 9 or 10 in the morning. But we were together all day long, and she is as much ownership of the bakery as I do. So, and she's not quite as aggressive as I am with like being the boss, but with me, she is. If she says she wants something done, she wants it done, and she's not shy with me about that. So there were times when we would have disagreements, huge disagreements, and would get into arguments and stuff like that. So it really wasn't good for our marriage, So I think it was like the first year, we had a couple, huge arguments. We actually talked about getting divorced. And we decided that working together wasn't good for our marriage. So the way we worked it out, which really benefited me also, was when she would come in, I would leave. So like on Saturday I would work Saturday night until, into the afternoon. And then she would come in Saturday afternoon and I would go home, which gave me the time that I really did need, either to relax or spend time with my kids or, whatever. And we did that on Thursdays, Saturdays, and then other days of the week. She'd come in the afternoon and I'd go home and go to sleep for a couple hours because I was up all night. So it benefited us in a few different ways.
Wow.
But I would just say, there are people that work together and do well, I work with my children. We get along really well. We're all in like kind of different departments. So it works out that we're not like together all the time.
Yeah, I think that's super wise to actually just be self-aware, I think is the key lesson there. Just know your wife, know yourself, and set boundaries. And that's so good. Thank you for sharing that. I want to go back to I want to talk about goal setting. You talked about being a visionary and, and even just the vision of being that bakery magazine and being a winner. I've heard you talk about, I think you set one big goal a year. Can you talk about that process and what that looks like?
Yeah. Sometimes the goals are so every year by the end of December, I always have a goal for the next year. And sometimes it's for my employees. Sometimes it's for a certain product line. One year it was building the new bakery. So one year it was winning, best retail bakery in America, which we did win that the next year after the merchandising award. That was a really big goal. And, but like there was one year that for some reason I decided that I wanted the bakery not to just be a destination for people in our community in Oakmont, Verona, Penn Hills, but for the entire city of Pittsburgh. And we did a lot of intentional things, the way we advertised, things that we advertised, creating Pittsburgh specific products, things like that. And that year, and I always believe this is God's confirmation that we're doing the right thing sometimes. That year, the Pittsburgh airport had a marketing company that they were targeting businesses in Pittsburgh that they considered Pittsburgh destination businesses, and we were one of those businesses that were on all the TV screens in the Pittsburgh airport.
And that made a big difference?
Yeah, well, to me it did.
That's huge. How many thousands and thousands of people?
Obviously, our business increased. And that's another thing. The bakery has increased in revenue every year, and it increased that year too. So it's always hard to say what it is. But I believe that made the people in the city and the people visiting our city much more aware of us.
Yeah, and can you just give people an idea now? Because you certainly have hit that goal of being known in Pittsburgh and your go-to destination. But now, are there people coming from all over the U.S. to visit the bakery, the world? Like, what does that look like?
Well, so, we have people every day. We have a lot of people that come in and have never even been into the bakery. And we know that because we see people, they come in sometimes and they wander around. So my team has done some pretty cool things. Like there's QR codes on every sign in the bakery. There's a big one when you walk in the front doors. On the sign that says take a number, there's a QR code there. And when you scan the QR code, it tells you how to navigate through the bakery. Like, if you want to have food or if you want to get in line or what you need to do and all that, where the bathrooms are. And so we see people doing that all the time. And obviously people that come in all the time don't need to do that. So when we do see people that we feel are new, a lot of times me, my son, my daughter, we'll go talk to them, some of the managers, and say, hey, where are you from? And they're from all over the country for sure. And so we always think that's interesting. Now, most of those people aren't coming to Pittsburgh to come to Oakmont Bakery, but because they're in Pittsburgh, they're coming to Oakmont Bakery, which I think is so cool. And we also we've had quite a few businesses that come to the bakeries from all over the country. They come just to tour the bakery, and we make ourselves very available. So when they'll bring their production teams or their managers, sometimes just the owners and their kids, but we take them on a full tour, share all of our information with them, which I learned from the bakery business in general. Is everyone all the people that I know that own bakeries, for the most part, are very friendly and open and kind of like a family. So when I heard about Porto's Bakery, which is in California, it's a family bakery that's huge. They have 7 locations, at least as big as ours or bigger. But when I was thinking I was actually going to expand the bakery we were in 3 buildings in the center of Oakmont, and I was going to join 2 of the buildings together and become about 12,000 square feet plus a warehouse in the back. So that was my plan. Somebody said, before you do that, you have to go to Porto's in California and see what he's done there. So my son and I got tickets. We flew to Porto's, and it was funny because Raul Porto is such a great guy. Everyone said, just so you know, Raul doesn't really talk to people very much, but he lets you tour his bakery, so just so you know that. So we get there. We met his manager at the front. He introduced us to Raul. So we're talking to Raul, and he takes us for a tour all through the bakery for 2 days. He drives us to other locations, to their commissary, all this stuff. And it was unbelievable. It was overload. It was like going to Disney World if you work at Kennywood, I think. So at the end of those 2 days, I said, we were sitting in the office, he goes, any other questions you have? He actually had a spreadsheet on his gigantic screen showing us their income and all this stuff.
Wow. And
any other questions? And I said, one thing I have to ask is, everybody said that you don't really talk to the bakery owners all that much when they come here, but you're very generous letting them tour the bakery. And he said, most of the people that come here from bakeries, the first thing they say to me in their first paragraph is, I would never want a bakery this big. And I'm like, why are you here? So I just ignore them. And he said, you and your son come in with eyes wide open and never stopped, so.
And leaders, that's one of my favorite stories that you share, Marc. And leaders, if you're listening to this, I tell people this all the time. Just ask. You'd be surprised who will spend time with you. Yeah. You'll be surprised who will give you their time if you just ask. And I was interviewing a guy named Don Yeager the other week for the podcast. He wrote for Sports Illustrated, got personally mentored by John Wooden, who's one of the greatest basketball coaches of all time. And he did the exact same thing you did. He started meeting with John, and he said, John, how many people do you do this with? He's like, not that many. And he said, well, how many people ask? He said, not as many as you would think. And I think so many times we think,
you lose that opportunity.
Never spend time with me, but you'd be surprised. So leaders, just ask. I want you to share another fun story, and I want to talk to you about competition. And so at one point in your journey, you had some competition from a bagel shop come into town. Can you tell that story and just maybe tie in some lessons about how you view competition?
So I'm very competitive. So when most of my friends were really into sports, and I was always into working since I was really young. So I'm competitive in business. So when the bakery was open for probably around 7 years, and the big bagel craze came. It was in the 90s, and there was bagels everywhere. The only place you could get them originally was in Squirrel Hill at Bagel Land, but now bagel shops were popping up. Bagel Land was increasing. Brugger's bagels were everywhere. So I decided to buy bagel equipment, which was probably, I think it was around $35,000 for a bagel machine. Because and that's the other thing. When originally when you made bagels, you just made a dough, which is a simple dough, and you cut the pieces, 3-ounce pieces, and then rolled them out and boiled them in water. All that. It's a very simple procedure, but when you're making a lot of them with not a lot of employees, a bagel machine, you make the dough, you stick it inside the machine, it rolls them out, cuts them in the exact right size, and then it rolls them into a bagel, drops them onto a tray, and all you do is pick them up and put them on trays. But it's the process is, it's the same process. The outcome's the same, but the process is very automated. So I decided to do that. So I bought the equipment, prayed about it, was really nervous about it, bought a bagel kettle. And right around the time that our bagel machine was coming, I heard that Bruegger's Bagels was opening a location 1 block from the bakery. And anybody that knows Oakmont knows that Oakmont is not a franchise town. It's all small businesses. It's just, the all-American little city, little town. So when I heard that, I was very nervous, of course, And the one thing I should have learned earlier that took me a long time to learn, I teach my kids now, is when I look at all of these stories, the basic thing is trust God. If you trust God, you don't get nervous. You don't spend all your time worrying. But it is important that you do something about it. You can't just sit around. So I decided that the bagels, Bruegger's claim to fame was kind of what they would do is when they were getting ready to open their locations, they would send a coupon to every address in that community, I think like a 7-mile radius or something, and they would all get a half a dozen of free bagels. So they got to try their bagels. When they baked all day, they baked their bagels all day. So they got to try their bagels for free, and I'm sure that helped kick off their opening. So I decided that we ran ads in the Penny Saver, which was the big paper of the time, and some church bulletins, things like that, and said, if you get a competitor's coupon, a bakery coupon, we'll double whatever they give you. So we were giving away a dozen bagels, but they had to bring their product into the bakery. So we had these people. So I bought these big white garbage cans and put them in the center of the bakery, and we made the customers throw their bagels into the garbage cans, kind of like make a statement. And then we gave them a free dozen donuts. And I mean, it got to the point where we had this one lady, she danced into the bakery, got my bagels. There's 50 people in there, and she tosses them into the garbage, And but we did donate all those bagels to our organization, so we didn't throw them away. That was, and it worked out. Our bagel, line did really well right away.
And how did it turn out for Bruegger's?
And so Bruegger's they were in the town, I think, for maybe 8 or 10 years, and then they went out of business. Yeah. So I'm sure that they had,
challenges. So well, thank you for sharing that. I love how competitive you are. I love that story. I want to talk about staffing. You have over 200 employees, which is just crazy. Like you said, it was probably crazy for you to think that you'd have that one day. My understanding of the times that we've spent together is you've also had people with you for years and years and years who have been really loyal. How do you, I guess I'll just leave this open-ended. What advice do you have for leaders in creating great cultures and really taking care of their staff to enable them to be so loyal to your organization?
The most important thing I think is, and I learned this as a manager in the supermarket, is that we have to be, the wages have to be competitive. So that's another thing. Like a mom and pop bakery, they would normally, you just pay your employees a little bit less because you're not a big corporation. And then a lot of, people were very loyal, so they'd stay for many years. But in my bakery, I decided that I was very competitive. So, when we first started, I believe that like a baker was at Giant Eagle, for instance, was maybe at $6 an hour. So we started them at $7 an hour. That's what we started them at. And we also always believed in promoting from within. So like the people that have been at the bakery for a while, like we have one woman who's been, Courtney, who is our operations director now. She started when she was, I think, 14 years old. And she was a great cashier. She was a merchandiser for some time. And then she was an order specialist. And now she's our operations director. She actually designed our POS system, which was a year-long job working with a computer programmer. And our system's unbelievable, But she also, right now she's designing a new surveillance system for the bakery. So she's just, so valuable to us. One of our head managers, Michael, was a high school kid, went to Riverview High School across the street from the bakery. And his goal was always to be an entertainer. He was in all the school plays. He got standing ovations, but he was, he started at the bakery as a cleaning guy and moved through the ranks, became a baker. And now he's our head front manager. He's been, I think, at the bakery for 20 years. And but a really funny story about it. And I love when people, I read a book one time called The Dream Maker, and it was about this company that the owner of the company had this little office, and when an employee was there for a certain amount of time, they got to go in his office and tell him what their dream was. And like there was all different ones. Everybody's dreams are different. One lady was only spoke Spanish and had I think an 8th grade education, and she wanted to speak English. And he sent her to the local community college, and she learned to speak English. A couple people always wanted to own property, and he helped them get loans, find houses, things like that. So I love that story, and I have that same feeling. I always want people to be as happy as I am, able to attain their goals. So Michael, who always wanted to be a star, and he's such a great actor. My daughter-in-law, who's our social media director, she started making these videos with Michael, and he's actually, and this is unbelievable, it's so true. Everywhere we go, people say, I want to meet Michael, or people come in the bakery and they're like, is Michael here today? I want to take a picture with him. Even his wife, people will say to him, what's it like being married to him? So he's definitely, he's a star at Oakmont Bakery for sure, but my daughter-in-law's social media, stuff that she does, which she didn't go to school for. She's very talented. We actually had a social media director that we hired that went to marketing school, and it just didn't really work out for us. So she filled in, my daughter-in-law, Samantha, filled in as the interim director and blew it out of the water. She has some posts that reach 1 million or 1.5 million likes. But Michael actually he loves the whole idea of what he does on social media.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you say so many things when you talk about just empowering people. One, it sounds like you really have a freedom internally to give people an opportunity to shine and go after their dreams. Like you have no insecurities about handing over, no control issues. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. And I learned that through the years. I was, in the earlier years, I was always concerned about, I always wanted to have my hand on everything. But now I've learned that most of these people are better at their jobs than I was when I was doing their jobs. It's just their thing. They're good at it. They're better than me. So why jump in? Like sometimes I think a leader will hold somebody back because they're constantly questioning them. And, I think sometimes you kind of have to accept a little less than what you really want to let somebody else grow in that position or field. We have a guy that works for us who was in jail, and we hired him as soon as he got out of jail. Somebody I knew him, and so we checked his background and stuff, and he had no other offenses before that, but he was a alcoholic and drug addict, and so he came to work at the bakery, and he was, he's been there now for about 18 years at the bakery and clean and sober for 18 years, and he helps a lot of people. It's amazing, But one of his goals was that he wanted to have a transition house where people got out of jail, and he helped them. So probably after he was at the bakery for a few years, I helped him find a house close by, and he purchased it. I helped him get a loan with the person that I got loans for, so I didn't really give him anything, but I helped him through the whole process. And now he's had the house for I think 10 or 12 years. And hundreds of people have lived in this house. It's a halfway house for people that get out of jail and they're transitioned to, their own life. So I think that's amazing.
I love that story and just how you put your employees first. And really as I've heard you share over and over again, it seems like generosity has been one of the major themes of your life and your wife and your entire family. And not just generosity with money, but obviously your time and investing in people I love. I do want to talk about generosity though. And I'll just leave this really open-ended. What does generosity look like in your life, and why has that been important to you?
So Susan and I both, our favorite scripture is in Luke, to whom much is given, much is required. And I think that says so much in it. I think, obviously it's so much is given by God. Like God gives us so much. He gives us, talents, wisdom, financial success. Like everything good comes from God. So, and then much is required, which is we have to pay it back. It's a requirement to pay it back. And so I always feel like both of us feel like the minute we're challenged to give, I mean, we pray about it. Like we don't just do it. We don't do really random stuff, but we pray about it, we talk about it, and then we help everybody we can. And we found that over the years, even things that seemed like a gigantic hurdle, it always ended up, another scripture is, at the end of it is, by your standard of measurement, it is measured back to you, which I love because it's like, that's kind of like the sky's the limit,
Yeah, and I know as believers, and again, there's a lot of believers listening to this, a lot of people tithe, they give 10%. And I love the story you shared where God really challenged you to actually double your giving. Can you share that story? Because I just think it's profound for leaders to hear. Yeah,
so, I was very involved in our local church, Amplified Church, and there was, I was on the board of directors, for quite a while now. But at one point, the church was struggling so much that we were actually thinking that we were going to have to give the church to another church, they couldn't afford the mortgage payments and stuff. And so our founding pastor came back and jump started the church, but we needed money because the church was in such a mess. The roof was caving in, everything was old, we had no sound equipment, all that stuff. So we were always 10% givers, no matter what, no matter how bad it was, what we needed or whatever, always get 10%. So that year, I said to my wife, it's never a stretch for her, but I said, what do you think about giving 20% instead of 10% this year, which is a lot, absolutely, Wow. So we decided to give 20%, which we did. And about towards the middle, or like probably 3/4 of the way into the year, we were invited by an organization called the RPIA, which is a bakery buying group. You have to be invited into, and there's certain criteria you have to meet. At that time, you had to be have a revenue of over $1 million a year. You had to be in business for so long. You had to be in good standing with all your vendors and stuff. So we were invited, and we got in. And just one product that we bought through there, I believe it. I can't really remember. It's something. It was a General Mills product that we were buying. We got such a good deal on through the RPIA that our income that year went up so much that our 10% or our 20% became 10% of our income that year. Wow. So our income went up our personal income went up so much that, it ended up really being 10% anyway.
I love that. I love the story. I love the generosity. I want to talk a little bit about church. You mentioned you were on the board of a church. It's played a huge role in your life, but you've made a comment before that always challenges me. Everyone listening to this clearly can understand how busy you are, working 12 plus hours a day, building the bakery. But you made a statement that if the church ever needed you, you would put the church over the bakery. So one, I want to verify that that's true, but can you talk about why you've made that decision and how has that impacted your life and your business?
So there were a lot of times, when we were really working on revamping the church and stuff that like I would never, ever be away from the bakery on a weekend. But we had a service on Saturday and Sunday. I went to every single service Saturday and Sunday, sometimes an hour and a half before and an hour after. So it was a gigantic amount of time in our peak times, at the bakery. And but I committed myself to that we were gonna build a church. We were gonna reach, Lee's goal was to reach as many people as possible, and that's what we did. But in order to do that, it takes so much, so much work and so much money and so much time. And so I committed myself to that. And I found is there's always, whenever I do stuff like that, I always find that I learn something through it that I never would have thought I learned. So I thought I'm just sacrificing this time, away from my business. But actually what I learned is when I made my priority, what I believe would be God's higher priority, he takes care of all the other stuff. So the bakery, we didn't skip a beat, it just kept on going just the way it always had, even though I wasn't there a lot of times during our busiest times.
Yeah, and you've mentioned him several times throughout, but Lee Kreitcher is your pastor. I believe he's one of your greatest friends. And I'm just curious, from a mutual friend perspective, what's the greatest thing that you've learned from Lee as your pastor?
Well, I mean, anybody that knows him knows that he's like the ultimate leadership guru. So I learned everything I know about leadership. I learned from him. It's just everything. It's like everything that I thought I knew, I didn't. I learned how he led at the church, and I use all the same techniques and ideas and stuff at the bakery, and it always works.
Lee always works. I love that. And because you've been on a board of church for so long around church world, do you have any advice? We have a lot of pastors listening to this or people that work in the church. From a business owner perspective, do you have any general advice for church leaders on how they can be better leaders in the church from a business perspective?
So one thing all through the years, so as long as I've been on the board, I've owned a business. And so many times people in the church world and even people in the congregation have said, you can't run the church like a business. The church isn't a business. Actually, business is the church, in my opinion. Like all the things that we do in business, really, we should be using, really come from church. Like Jesus, I read a book one time called Jesus for CEO. He was the ultimate CEO. He could handle everything. He was the best leader. He was a servant leader. So I believe that, we shouldn't look at it that way. All businesses should run like the church runs. And I think that is business. I mean, as far as the way we treat our staff, the way we treat our congregation people or customers, I just think that I think business people have a lot to offer in the church world, ideas, visions, things like that.
Yeah. And any advice there for pastors? Because I think sometimes, if you came into a church, a lot of times leaders wouldn't know how to capitalize. In my perspective, a lot of churches would look at you and say, well, hey, can you help out? Can you greet on a Saturday night service and say hello to people, which is great. But how can pastors really, I don't want to say take advantage of, but really partner with the business owners in their church to maximize the gifts that God put in people like you? Well,
I mean, most of the time, business owners are big givers most of the time. And they also, a lot of times, I think business owners realize that you have to put money into things for it to work. One of the things I feel like I was a big asset to Lee in the church was, so we gave regularly, our 10%, but then like when he wanted to do a project, like, we had a department in the church called Upstreet, which is our kids department. And we remodeled this whole wing, turned it into a little town, kind of like Oakmont. So it had a bakery, a candy store, a savings and loan, things like that. But I paid for a lot of that, as an offering, not as part of my tithe. And but I also liked doing it. Like I liked being the person. I met with the contractors. I kept it going. And I think a lot of times business owners know how to get things done. So if you really want to get stuff done, a lot of times it's the business owners that will be committed to the end result, to the goal.
Yeah, and to tie things up, as we start to talk about, you've already mentioned, you're now thinking about succession, and you have family members that you want to take the bakery and run with it. And we were just talking about Lee. For those who haven't listened, Lee's been on the podcast before, Lee Kreitcher, and he wrote a book on seamless transitions. And if you haven't listened to that and you're in a season where you're thinking about succession, I can't think of a greater resource for you. Lee is phenomenal. Read his book, connect with him. He'll actually do consulting with you. And be it that Marc said he does everything that Lee says. Lee has transitioned the church. And I'm just curious, Marc, how are you thinking and setting up Oakmont Bakery to hand off to the next generation?
So my son, who's 35, he was born the year the bakery was started. He's actually been coming to work with me since he was 5 years old. He just has a love for the business, and he has the entrepreneurial spirit, no question. So that I don't believe that's something you can really teach somebody. I think it's just, but the difference between me and him is, like there was a year, every year, I would, on Christmas Day, I would go to the bakery and take our Christmas decorations down. On Thanksgiving Day, I would go to the bakery and put my Christmas decorations up. So Tony would always say to me, Dad, I want to open the bakery someday, just me and you, So this one year on Thanksgiving, I took him with me to the bakery, and so we hurried up and put the Christmas decorations up. And then I fired up one of the ovens. We made coffee, so we made some donuts, we made some products, and he was in the front of the store, and we opened the bakery at like 9 o'clock in the morning. My wife didn't know; she would have killed me. But before you know it, we had a line of people out the bakery and down the sidewalk. And this was like, I think he was about 7 or 8. And he didn't flinch. He didn't skip a beat. He was not nervous, And I think, and we took him like $500 that day, and I gave it to him, And but right from that age, I could just see in him that he has that spirit. He loves people. He has as much a relationship with our housekeeping staff as he does with our top bakers and decorators. And I made him, that was his first position at the bakery, just like me. He mopped the floors and emptied garbage cans, and moved all the way through the ranks. He learned everything on the way up. So now he is so our succession plan has already started. We actually started looking at it about 4 or 5 years ago, and he's now 10% owner of the bakery. And eventually, I'm 61. Within the next few years, after my last couple children graduate college, he'll become the owner of the bakery. And the way we work things now is it's very clear to everybody that he is the boss. So I go in every day, and I talk to people, and I help wherever help needs to be and stuff. But at the end of the day, everybody knows that Tony calls the shots. So I never get in the way or say, you shouldn't have done this or you shouldn't have done that, because I think he knows enough by now. I give him advice, and I think he's phenomenal at his job.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, Marc, this has been a phenomenal interview. Just as our time's wrapping up together, I'll just leave this really open-ended. Is there anything else that you just want to share with leaders today to add value to them?
I just think, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever got from somebody, which was a pastor at the church, when I was going through a really rough time with my marriage and the bakery. And I always remember, and I was probably 26 or 27 at the time, and he said, the best piece of advice I can give you is whatever you want written on your tombstone is what you should go after. And so I remember at that time, the most important thing to me was my wife and my children, and they were on the back burner for sure. I put the business, it was my first priority. And one of the things he said was, the first thing he said to me is, how's the bakery doing? I said, it's doing great. It really is. It's doing really good. It's growing. And how's your marriage? I said, it's terrible. And that was the priority. That was the order of priority. At that time, the bakery was the most important thing, and it was thriving and doing well. When I reversed that and put my family first, God, my family, my church, the bakery was still doing great. It always has, and so I think it's really important to keep your priorities in order. And I guess my advice would be lead like your legacy depends on it. That's what I always tell my kids.
Wow.
That is your legacy.
I can't think of a better way to end the interview. That was a mic drop for sure. Marc, thank you so much. If you're listening to this, leaders, again, we'll include links to everything that Marc shared in the show notes. If you're in Pittsburgh, make sure you check out Oakmont Bakery. Go visit it, buy some delicious food and pastries. And again, you can order online. And if you're listening out of town, come in, make sure that you add that to your bucket list of Pittsburgh visits while you're here. So thank you so much, Marc. Appreciate it. And
thank you, Doug.
Yep. Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Marc. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes. And I say it every episode, but I want to challenge you, leader, that if you want to 10x your growth this year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups are simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together on a consistent basis for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. For me personally, mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 8 years. So if you're interested in learning more about launching or joining a group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds or email me at dougsmith@l3leadership.org. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and today I'll quote Henry Cloud, who said this: "Unforgiveness destroys a good life. Forgiveness creates it." So good. Well, leader, know that my wife Laura and I love you. We believe in you, and I say it every episode, but don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership.